The generation that lived through World War I is gone, and the last surviving veterans have died. But their memories live on in a remarkable project that recorded their stories on film.
Young people like myself are saying, we'll show those Germans, we'll push them back home.
Everywhere you went, a great big posters up of Kitchener. His finger seemed to be pointing at your king and country need you.
In this series, those who were there tell the story of the war in their own words.
You've got no feelings of humanity. Right then. Afterwards, yes.
In this episode, we hear from those who stayed behind and fought their own battles.
People starved. Did you know people starved? If you were hungry, you didn't tell anybody, you didn't go begging. Why would you?
Whether you were going to shoot Germans or were they going to shoot you, you never knew what the future held.
These last veterans of World War I revealed their experiences in the hope that what they went through would never be forgotten. As World War I began, it soon became clear that this would be a war fought not only in the trenches and battlefields of the Western Front, but also in the fields and factories of the home front. For the first time, victory lay in the hands of a country, not just an army. The crops were being harvested as the first troops left for war with Germany. Millions of men left the fields, and villages emptied of young men eager to exchange manual labour for the glamour of life and uniform. Len Whitehead remembers saying goodbye to his elder brother as he left for the front line.
We sang him the little song. No more will I work in the harvest field to reap the golden corn, but I'm going to join the army and I'm off tomorrow morn.
Towns and cities vied with one another to attract the most recruits. Friends from the same street, factory or football team became part of so-called PALS battalions. As the regular army fought and died abroad, the landscape of Britain changed. Parks and gardens across the country were no longer playgrounds, but training grounds for the raw recruits of the new volunteer army. Onlookers like Florence Billington had their first glimpse of the brutality of combat.
We saw these boys and they were all sticking bayonets into sacks of straw on the trees where children used to play. And they were running towards them and told just whereabouts in the sack that bayonet had to go. So then we knew what that was.
New recruits found the training hard, but saying goodbye to their families could be even harder.
I put my arms around my mother, and she was crying, and she said, if you don't come back, I don't know what she was going to say, but I interrupted that and said, oh, I shall come back, don't worry about that, I shall come back. And it was such an emotional moment for me that I'm afraid I broke away from her and left her, still in that fearful state.
Many of the volunteers left wives and children behind as they went away to do their duty. Ruth Armstrong grew up in the Wiltshire village of Tilshead.
My father said to my mother, oh, I've got to go. My group is called up and I've got to go. I've got to go tomorrow. And of course, she was very, very upset and asked her two children, oh, well, the end of the world had come for us with Daddy gone.
10-year-old Lucy Walter from Kidderminster never forgot her father's goodbye.
In the evening, my father said, I've got to go back Now I'm back to Kidderminster, back to the barracks. And will you walk with me a little way, just up the hill? Will you come with me? And of course I would. We went off down the road and then up this hill. And I was held onto his hand so tight, I can remember that. And when we got to the top, he said, "No, I won't take you any further. You must go back now." And he picked me up against him and put his arm, held me tight to him, and he kissed me. And he put me down, and he said, "Well, you must go now. Wave to me at the bottom, won't you?" And I stopped and waved to him, and he waved back. And he gestured like that, as much as, "Go on, you must go home now," sort of thing, you know, gently like that. And then he waved.
As the volunteers prepared to leave, Salisbury Plain was chosen for final artillery exercises. Ruth Armstrong lived nearby.
We used to get the guns firing over the village, and it was really terrible because the house used to shake, and that was practicing, of course. And the policeman used to come around on his bike, knock at the doors, and he would say, "Well, missus, open your windows a bit tonight. There's going to be a bit of fun tonight." And, of course, they fired right over the village. You could hear them whiz over the village. Under the bed my brother used to get. I used to get under the pillows. Used to really shake the houses.
The bit of fun didn't last. Soon, a terrifying sight appeared in the sky above Britain. The Zeppelin. January 1915 saw the first air raid when 2 German Zeppelins bombed Great Yarmouth, killing 4 people. Government propaganda films recreated scenes painfully familiar to those caught in the new air raids. The airship's indiscriminate destruction earned them the nickname the Baby Killers.
It was the people screaming that got me down. One or two had lost their child or their partner or something, and they were calling and trying to find each other, and everybody was laid on the floor. We weren't standing up, and people were trying to, and calling, "John, John, where are you, John? Oh, for Christ's sake, John, speak to me," and things like that, and I'm praying, "Please, God." Well, I couldn't see the sense of that. I really couldn't see the sense of that.
Despite hastily built air raid shelters, Zeppelin attacks that year claimed a further 177 lives.
One evening, it was not all that dark. We were sitting indoors playing games on the table, snakes and ladders and all that sort of thing. And we heard a lot of screaming, and we all run out. "Oh, there's a Zeppelin coming. Oh, Kaiser's coming." Everybody got out in the road screaming, and they didn't know what to make of it. And my brother got all worried about it, and he said, that old Kaiser's going to jump out of that Zeppelin and take the lot of us. What are we going to do?" And then my little friend said, "We ought to go and get the policeman." I said, "What can the policeman do?" I said that if the Kaiser comes down, he'd take the policeman as well.
The British fought back with anti-aircraft guns. Kathleen Barron remembers being horrified by the sight of a direct hit on an enemy craft.
It was like a long silver pencil, all on fire, right up in the sky. And the neighbours was hooraying, and Germans, you know. I said, "But they're men burning alive." All I could think of, they were burning alive. And I rushed indoors. I couldn't stand it.
As the attacks continued over Britain, the volunteer soldiers in France faced one of their first real tests. They took part in a major attempt to break through German lines near the town of Loos. It was here that Len Whitehead's elder brother George went over the top. His body was never found.
The first we knew of it, of his being killed, was a pal of his who joined up at much the same time, wrote to my mother, "Dear Mrs. Whitehead, I am writing to tell you your son George has been killed." My mother, of course, burst into tears. "Don't read any more," she said. And after a time, when she calmed down a little, she said to me, "Go and tell your father." My father was ploughing in a field near to the farmhouse, and I waited for him to finish about with his plough and 2 horses. "George has been killed," I told him. And he didn't answer, but left his horses all steaming in the mild late October weather, and we walked back in silence to the house. When we got to the house, he went to the bottom of the stairs and called up, "That's all right, ain't it?" He made no attempt to go up to comfort my mother, but went into the kitchen, sat in his wooden armchair and put his arms on the table and his head on his arms for a little while, wept, I think. Then he went back to his ploughing.
The PALS battalions had allowed friends to fight together. But now, as they died together, entire communities lost their men. Villages, factories and football teams were wiped out in a single day's fighting. Now the women of Britain were required to shoulder the burden of war. With many men away at war, large numbers of women woke up to radically new opportunities. By 1917, 1 million women were doing what had been men's jobs in munitions factories. Daisy Collingwood was one of them.
I felt when I was working on munitions, I really thought, well, I haven't got any brothers to go and fight, I'm doing the next best thing, and I was quite pleased to be able to do it.
12-hour shifts were common, day and night.
I had never stayed up all night in my life, and I started on night work. I never thought I'd get through that shift. But I did. Like everything else, it's surprising what you can do when you've got to.
Children were also sent out to work to help pay for food. During the war, thousands of them swapped the classroom for the factory floor. Dennis Gilfeather began in the Dundee jute mills when he was 9 years old.
We're starting at 6 in the morning until 6 at night. You had 2 breaks through the day, 9 to 10 and 1 to 2. And it was 5.5 days. You worked 54 hours a week and you got £1 and a penny. But that was gold in these days. I was a very, very proud boy when I got my pay and took it home to my mum. I knew it should make her happy, and it certainly made me very happy. And I felt I was 6 feet tall instead of 5 feet 6.
Children who remained in school were also expected to do their bit. Ruth Armstrong's teacher encouraged her pupils to write letters to the front line and knit for the troops.
We made scarves and balaclavas and socks and gloves. I'd done scarves because I wasn't much of a hand at knitting. And then she wanted us to write to the soldiers out in the front, you know, and to cheer them up. And I got an answer from one of them. And he told me, he said, how very happy he was to get my letter. And he hadn't had a letter from anyone for 6 weeks. And he had this letter from me and how it cheered him up.
Letters from home raised soldiers' morale. But the letters that came back could have the opposite effect. Tens of thousands of people were now receiving the news they most dreaded. Army Form B10482. Its blunt message, killed in action. Dennis Gilfeather's family received just such a telegram.
When this happened, when the official news came through the door, my mother had the wee boy in a high chair, and we were round the table, and she was attending to us. When the telegram boy came, my mother went to the door and she got this telegram. She'd opened it, looked at it, collapsed on the floor. And suddenly, the news was out now. The news that my father wasn't going to see him again. You're stuck with that. This thing didn't leave your mind for years. You're not going to see your dad again.
The postman brought a letter, and my mother opened it, and she sat there, and all she said was, "Oh, he's dead." And then she did begin to cry. I don't remember crying. I felt so stunned. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'd never see him again. But oh dear, I did cry at night, because I remembered my father. Always tucked me up and he always kissed my forehead and said, "Good night, Lulu. God bless you." Every night, he never failed. And I did miss that so much.
By 1917, the German Navy was trying to starve Britain out. Two-thirds of the country's food came from overseas. In a single month, German U-boats destroyed over 370 merchant ships bringing fresh supplies. People at home had to do without.
The only time we had a meal, really, was on the Sunday, when we used to have a dinner on a Sunday. That was practically the only real meal we had in the week. And the bread was black, almost black. Couldn't get white bread, never. And there wasn't much of anything. And people starved. Did you know people starved? If you were hungry, you didn't tell anybody, you didn't go begging. Why would you? People didn't, they had their pride. I wouldn't have told anybody I was hungry.
My mother, I don't know how she managed. We were starving. If the war went on another 4 months, I don't know what would have happened. My mother, she was done everything she can for both of us, my little brother and me. She'd done everything she could. It was nothing to see her sit at the table with an empty plate. "Mummy, you're not eating." "Well, I'm not hungry." Whatever she had was for my brother and myself.
Well-bred girls left suburbia for the countryside. Towards the end of 1917, over 250,000 women were labouring on farms, with 16,000 volunteers digging for Britain in the Women's Land Army itself. The Army Agricultural Labour Corps also provided more manpower. Many were disabled ex-soldiers, like 19-year-old George Louth, who who was sent home after the Battle of the Somme, suffering from partial deafness. George was relieved to be home, but knew nothing about farming.
I didn't know how a potato grew, never mind about haymaking. And we went to this farm, and we was there a fortnight. And he sent us back. Said we were no good. So the officer said to me, well, look, he said, if you can't do anything on the land, it's no good you stopping here. You'll have to go back to France again. I said, oh, no. I said, is there some tractor drivers being wanted somewhere? Is that what you want to do? I said, yes, sir. I felt free, didn't I, after all that trauma. It disappeared. It disappeared altogether. I thought it was yesterday.
Hunger and hardship at home scarred a generation, but the men on the front line lived through even greater tests. In the next episode, Allied and German forces begin a bitter struggle to break the deadlock as our story reaches 1917.